My name is Eleanor Grace Whitmore. I'm 68 years old, and for nearly 5 decades, I was a wife, a mother, and the quiet heart of Hazelbrook Orchards, a small organic apple farm nestled in the rolling hills of Pennsylvania. My hands, though stiff with arthritis, still remember every step of turning dough into sourdough loaves and pruning trees. At dawn with Richard, my husband 3 weeks ago, I buried him. Richard, and I had been married since 1981. We built everything together, this orchard, this home, this family, and yet, the morning after his funeral, I realised that I might not have built what I thought I had, or maybe it just wasn't enough to hold on to my children. Richard died of pancreatic cancer, 14 months of watching a man of the earth waste away his strength, stolen bit by bit. He didn't want the kids to know, let them live their lives a little longer without the shadow. He had whispered to me one night, his voice thick with morphine, and because I loved him, I agreed. But in truth, I already knew our children. Darren and Samantha had grown distant long before the diagnosis. Darren, the eldest, had carved out a fast-paced career in Boston's financial world and hadn't been home for more than a handful of weekends in over a decade. Samantha, on the other hand, floated from one failed wellness business to another, always funded by Richard's savings and always in need of just one more loan. I had hoped that grief would bring them back to the core of who we were, that they would remember the orchard, the family dinners, the love that built this house. But when they arrived for the funeral, I didn't see children mourning their father. I saw professionals calculating an estate the night after the funeral. I sat alone in the kitchen, staring at the worn wood of our dining table. I told them we could sort through Richard's things together. The next day, it was a small gesture, a mother's way of making space for memory. But they had other plans. The next morning, sunlight spilled through the lace curtains Richard and I had picked out together. 30 years ago, I made coffee, the simple kind Richard liked, not the imported blend Darren had brought from Boston, and waited at the kitchen table. They came downstairs dressed sharply. Darren in a blazer, he didn't bother to remove Samantha in a silk blouse and perfectly curled hair. They looked like they were heading to a business meeting, not sitting down to remember their father. Mum. Darren began placing his coffee mug down with that same practiced precision I'd seen in his father. We've been talking. Samantha glanced at him, then at me. We think it's time to start settling things. The estate, the business, the house. I blinked, unsure I'd heard right. Settling. It's practical. Darren said you can't run the orchard alone and the house. It's big, Mom. Too much for someone your age. My age? The word sat heavy in the room. I had pruned those trees beside Richard, through blizzards and heat waves. I had handled payroll when we couldn't afford an assistant, baked pies for fundraisers, driven tractors, delivered crates to food banks. We want you to be comfortable, Samantha added, her voice smooth like a sales pitch. There's a wonderful retirement community 2 hours south, Sunnyvale Estates activities. Friends your age, I stood to clear the breakfast plates needing motion to hide my shaking hands, then Darren pulled out a folder. Dad spoke to me about this last year. He said, sliding a set of documents toward me, he wanted Melissa and me to take over. I looked at the paper. It was printed on Darren's corporate letterhead. Richard's signature, steady, too perfect, looked off. He hadn't written that clearly in months, not since the morphine. This isn't from our family lawyer. I said he was lucid when he signed it. Darren insisted he wanted this. Samantha said quickly, a fresh start. There's a developer interested $7 million for the land. We'd be set. You'd be cared for a developer. They wanted to sell the orchard level. It replaced a lifetime of harvests and sustainability, and giving back with concrete and cul-de-sacs you're talking about. Selling your father's life's work, I said quietly. Mum, be reasonable. Darren said, the orchard can't last forever. I felt something rise in me, a slow, burning fury I hadn't touched since I once chased off a fox, trying to get into the chicken coop. I looked at both of them, my children, and said with calm steadiness, show me the will. Darren hesitated, then pushed it forward again. I didn't touch it, I'm going to bed. I said, we'll talk tomorrow. But deep down, I already knew there would be no tomorrow conversation. They weren't grieving, they were executing a plan. I didn't sleep that night. I lay awake in the bed Richard and I had shared for decades, listening to the creaks in the farmhouse walls and the wind brushing against the apple trees outside. Every sound was familiar. It was the silence in my children's hearts that had become foreign. By morning, the smell of coffee wafted through the house. Not the warm, nostalgic kind, but sharp, bitter, imported Darren's kind of coffee. I moved slowly, my joints aching more from betrayal than from age. When I came downstairs, they were already waiting coats on suitcase pack. "The suitcase wasn't mine. We packed some essentials for you," Samantha said brightly. "We thought we could drive you to Sunnyvale today, just to look. You don't have to decide yet. I'm not going to a retirement community," I said, pouring myself a cup. Darren checked his watch. "Mum, be reasonable. The paperwork is done. We close with the developers next week." "You can't stay here. I've lived here my entire adult life," I replied, voice calm. "This is my home." "It's all of ours," Darren said flatly. "Dad left the business to us. It's time you let go." I stared at him, and for the first time I truly saw him, not as the boy who once followed Richard through the orchards, asking about bees and frost, but as a stranger, a man who viewed me as a liability to be managed. "I need my medication," I said, stepping away. "And I'd like to grab some family photos." Samantha nodded, visibly relieved. "Take whatever personal items you want, we'll ship the rest." Upstairs, I didn't cry. I gathered my pills. But also, something they didn't know existed behind a panel in the medicine cabinet installed back in the 80s. When Richard worried about burglars, I retrieved my passport and birth certificate in the closet. I reached behind his old flannel shirts and pulled out a small fireproof box. It was heavy. It held something more powerful than sentiment. A deed, the original deed, to 20 acres of land, purchased in my maiden name before marriage land, with water rights land, essential to any future development. When I returned downstairs, my purse was heavier, but my heart lighter. "Ready?" Darren asked. "Sure," I said. Allowing Samantha to take my arm, I let them believe I was defeated. We drove past the fields, just beginning to bloom, past the elementary school, where I volunteered, past the library where I read to children. But instead of taking the highway towards Sunnyvale, Darren veered onto a remote county road. 20 minutes later, he pulled onto a gravel shoulder beside an empty field. "This is where you get off, Mom," he said as casually as if he were announcing a stoplight. "The house and business are ours now." Samantha's smile faltered. "Darren, what?" "She'll contest, the will make scenes. This is cleaner. She has clothes, her meds. There's a gas station 5 miles up." He opened my door, and just like that, they left me standing on the side of a road. With nothing, or so they thought, the car disappeared down the road, leaving a cloud of dust and the smell of betrayal. I stood still, the wind tugging at my coat, clutching the small suitcase they had packed for me. I wasn't afraid, I wasn't broken, I was free. I began to walk not toward the gas station Darren had so generously mentioned, but toward town, toward my next move. My flats weren't made for gravel roads, and the early spring sun was already warming the back of my neck. But with every step, my purpose solidified. In my purse was everything I needed. My ID, my passport, my medication, and most importantly, the original deed to 20 acres of prime orchard land that Darren and Samantha didn't know existed, land I had purchased in my own name. Before Richard and I married, it was a precaution back then. Just in case the business didn't survive, Richard had called it our just in case safety net. Now it was my lifeline. Those 20 acres weren't just any land. They held the only natural water source on the entire property without it. No irrigation without irrigation, no orchard and no development. My children thought they had cornered me, but they didn't understand the soil beneath their feet. They didn't understand the weight of legacy I did. After nearly 2 hours of walking, my feet were blistered and aching. But I reached the edge of Hazelbrook and the familiar sight of Miller's Gas and Grocery. It was small, old-fashioned, and unchanged. a place where people still called each other by name and paid in cash. I sat on the bench outside and watched the cars come and go. I didn't look like much, just a tired old woman with a suitcase, but I had something far more powerful than they ever would. The truth, Ray Miller stepped out from behind the counter, wiping his hands on his apron. He had known me for over 30 years. Mrs. White, more. He said, his brow furrowing. You all right? You look a little pale, just resting. Ray, been a long day, I said. He looked at the suitcase beside me, then back at me with concern. Real sorry about Richard, he was a good man. Yes, I nodded. Yes, he was. He hesitated, then asked gently, You need to use the phone if it's not too much trouble. He led me inside past the shelves of canned peaches and discount cereal to a small office in the back. I dialed the number from memory. Our family lawyer, Harold Jennings. Naomi, he answered on the first ring. Surprised I've been trying to reach you. I expected you at the will reading. My grip tightened on the receiver. What? Reading there was a pause. Darren presented a will. I had concerns. It didn't match the file. Your husband and I updated last year. I need your help. I said, my voice clear and your discretion. You have both my office 1 hour. I hung up and turned to Ray. Do you sell prepaid phones? He nodded a few, want one, yes, and a bottle of water. He refused to take my money on the house. Mrs. Whitemore, you need anything else, you just say the word. His kindness nearly undid me, but I didn't cry when I buried Richard, and I wouldn't cry now I had work to do, and I wasn't finished yet. Harold Jennings' office was on the second floor of an old Victorian house on Main Street, just across from the town library. He'd been our lawyer for over 30 years. Harold was the kind of man who wore sweater vests without irony and still believed in handshakes. His secretary Helen gasped softly when she saw me. Mrs. White. More. Mr. Jennings is expecting you. Would you like a glass of water coffee? I'm fine, thank you, I said. Harold met me at the door to his office. He hadn't aged much since Richard's last visit, just a bit more stooped perhaps, but his eyes were sharp alert. Naomi, he said, not leading me to the desk, but instead to a pair of leather chairs beside the window. He sat across from me, his expression serious. Tell me everything. So I did. I told him about the funeral. The fake will the board, room-like discussion in our kitchen. The drive, the roadside, abandonment, every detail. He didn't interrupt, he just listened occasionally, nodding his face, growing darker by the minute. When I finished, I reached into my purse and removed the fireproof box from it. I pulled the original deed to the 20 acres, the land Richard and I had quietly set aside decades ago. In my name, Harold examined the document with a reverent sort of silence. This is gold. Naomi, this isn't just land, this is leverage with the water rights and the zoning. The developer can't touch anything without this. I know he leaned back, tapping the edge of the deed. Thoughtfully, the Warren submitted. It's a forgery. I had my suspicions when I saw the signature. It was too clean, too smooth for a man under hospice care. I knew it wasn't Richard's. We'll challenge it, Harold said, but that takes time. Meanwhile, we use this. He held up the deed. You still have legal ownership of the most critical piece of the land. They can't move forward with the sale without your consent. I want my home back, I said quietly, and I want them to understand what they've done. Harold nodded. Then we'll make them understand first. I'll draft a letter to the developer. They need to be made aware that the property is not what they were promised. Will they back out if they're smart? They will. Developers don't like lawsuits, and they certainly don't like incomplete land rights. He stood suddenly purposeful. I also know a judge in district court. We can get a motion filed to freeze the sale until the matter is resolved. I looked out the window across the street, where a young couple was walking, hand in hand, unaware of the quiet storm beginning in this small office. I don't want revenge, Harold, I said more to myself than to him. I want truth and peace. You'll have both, he promised, starting now by noon. The next day, Harold had filed an emergency injunction to freeze any transfer of ownership related to Hazelbrook Orchards. A courier delivered the legal notice to the development firm Darren and Samantha had been dealing with. Within hours, the deal was suspended. The developer, faced with unexpected legal complications and the revelation that a key portion of the land containing the only natural water source was owned separately and undisclosed, began to backpedal. Their lawyers reached out to Harold with urgent requests for clarification. I told them the truth, Harold said as we sat in his office reviewing documents. The land is incomplete, the water rights are not transferable, and more importantly, your children do not have the authority. They claim the evening. I received a text message from Samantha. It was the first time she'd reached out since they left me on the roadside. Mum, please call me. We need to talk. Darren's freaking out. We didn't know about that other land. Can we just fix this? Fix this? I stared at the words on my prepaid phone. There was no apology, no recognition of what they'd done. Just panic now that the money was slipping through their fingers. I didn't reply later that night. Darren called Harold directly, demanding explanations, trying to reassert control. But Harold calmly informed him that all matters would now go through legal channels. They're realizing Harold said that they miscalculated badly. They thought I had nothing left. I replied, but I had everything they forgot to value. He looked at me with quiet pride. You're handling this with grace. Eleanor, a lot of people would have gone straight to scorched earth. I lived too long with kindness in my bones to become bitter. Now I said, but I won't be silent either. Outside the town of Hazelbrook moved on with its day. Kids riding bikes, a dog barking in the distance, someone mowing their lawn. Life was still simple here, still honest, and I intended to keep it that way. The land would not be sold. Not now. Not like this. The orchard. Richard built. The legacy he left was not a commodity. It was home, and I wasn't done protecting it in the weeks that followed. I didn't return to the old farmhouse. I rented a modest apartment above the bakery on Hazelbrook's main street. It had a small balcony, just big enough for a rocking chair and a few potted herbs. The place smelled like cinnamon and fresh bread in the mornings. It wasn't the home Richard and I built, but it was mine, and that mattered. I started teaching again, quilting on Wednesday nights at the community centre, just like before I even began holding weekend workshops at the library, sharing what I knew about organic gardening and sustainable fruit farming. Teenagers came, retirees came, even young couples hoping to start their own farms. People listened, not because I raised my voice, but because I spoke with history in my hands. The land we protected for decades, I donated the water rights in a trust to the Hazelbrook Agricultural Cooperative, a local initiative that supports young farmers. They'd use it, not sell it. They'd care for the trees like Richard had. That was the future I wanted. Darren and Samantha kept their distance. I heard whispers that the developer pulled out entirely, that the fake had been formally challenged and frozen, that their reputations had taken a hit in their respective cities. But I didn't gloat. I didn't need revenge to be loud, to be real. I chose peace, but not at the cost of truth. The orchard remained untouched, blooming as always in spring. And every time I passed by it on my walks, I smiled, not with bitterness, but with the quiet strength of a woman who had reclaimed not just her land, but her voice. They had underestimated me, but I had finally remembered who I was. I often think back to that moment on the gravel road, standing alone with a suitcase. I didn't pack watching my own children drive away, without a second glance. It should have broken me, but it didn't, because in that silence I finally heard the truth. I had ignored, for years, love is not loyalty, without question, and being a mother does not mean tolerating betrayal, just because you raised the ones who betrayed you. Darren and Samantha believed they could erase me. That because I was older, grieving alone, I wouldn't fight back, that I had no choice but to hand over everything. But they forgot something before I was a wife. A mother, a widow, I was Eleanor Grace, a woman who built something with her hands, her heart and her mind, and I had never needed to scream to be strong. What they saw as weakness My silence, my trust, my love was actually the very power that protected me. If you're listening to this and you've ever been cast aside, underestimated, or treated like a footnote in your own life, I want you to hear this. Your strength isn't in how loud you fight, it's in how well you know what you stand for. And when you stand your ground, even quietly, it echoes louder than any betrayal. My orchard still stands. My name is still on the deed, and my life, it's mine again. So, to anyone who's ever been told this is where you get off, I say walk if you must, but don't leave your worth behind. Walk with purpose, walk with quiet power, and when you're ready, tell your story. It might just save someone else. If this story moved, you don't forget to like, share, and leave a comment below. And if you've ever been underestimated and found your strength, tell us your story matters.